Well, I think we should probably go ahead and get started just to recognize everyone's time. I know you're probably all very busy. I'm joining you from outside the Rossland Public Library in British Columbia. My dad's internet went down. I came for a visit, so that's the joy of working in this context. But we're really thrilled to have you all here and welcome you to this session. We're, of course, excited to have Terry Rhodes here, who is the Vice President of, it's written down on another piece of paper, Quality
Curriculum and Assessment.
I was so close. I was so close. From the Association of American Colleges and Universities. And he's going to share a little bit with us today about the Value Institute and the different work that they do and connect that to our discussion this week around stakeholders. Before we get started, we did want to make a little announcement that we are really excited that Stylus is a sponsor of this event. And so we will have a virtual booth, and we'll get that posted up on our website, and we've got a little link for you. And Kevin, I believe attendees get a discount on Stylus books.
That is correct. And I believe not only a discount, but free shipping. So, and it's all in the two links that I put in the chat. One is to an intermediary page they put together that highlights books specific to ePortfolios and different aspects of teaching and learning that are framed by this conference. And then the Stylus virtual booth. So if you're using your end of year budget or what have you to get books for your faculty development library or your own personal library, you can go crazy. So the discount extends to any book that they sell.
Cool.
Thanks, Kevin. Terry, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Tracy and Kevin. And thanks to all of you who have joined this afternoon. I think it is afternoon almost everywhere. I'm going to do try to do several things, but two in particular. And I'll preface this by saying I almost always tend to put more in a slideshow than one should, especially when you want to be able to talk about it. But I've just sort of gotten into a habit of wanting people to have something that they can reference back that's sort of all in the same place that they may find possible to use. And have it there in a fairly easy location. So this will be in the resource pages as well, so that you can access it. But I'm going to go through some of this stuff fairly quickly because it's stuff that I know some of you may be familiar with, some of you not. And I'm going to really focus on the employer lens initially. As a stakeholder group, because it's gotten a lot of attention and continues to recently. But in the latter part of our time together, I want to actually look at some examples of a student portfolio and how the rubrics have been utilized and can be utilized to do and accomplish a lot of what we're trying to do with portfolios and the digitally mediated and facilitated kind of class environment, learning environment that we're confronting with now and likely for the next few months, if not year, as the primary way in which we're interacting with our students. So I'm going to share my screen with you and put the slides up. Is everybody seeing this slide that says engaging multiple stakeholders? Okay, good. That's the title for this, and that's what we're going to do. Value rubrics were mentioned. That's why I'm here, AAC&U. We oversaw the creation of the value rubrics. Many of you may have heard of them or may be familiar. There are 16 of them. They're listed here. Even though you go through a shopping cart on our website, they're free, available in Word as well as PDF, can be downloaded for free, but it looks like you're buying them, but there's no charge. But those came out of a lot of work that we have done over decades in talking with faculty and other educators across all kinds of campuses. And part of this is that we became convinced in the Margaret Spellings era when there was a big push towards standardized testing and standardization in general, that rubrics are really powerful, powerful tools, not only for assessment, but for high impact learning. That is what we really want for our students, because that deepens their learning. It's a learning that they don't just do for the test, but that sticks with them beyond that test, beyond that class. And the rubrics become a guide that faculty, another stakeholder group, and students, another stakeholder group, can share. And indeed, that's the whole point of it, is that there is some level of shared understanding. But it also focuses on and keeps faculty judgment at the center of that interactive process. Because these were developed in a national context with faculty and educators across the country and the world, it is a shared understanding, a shared experience, a shared framework that's there with a set of benchmarks. It does actually encourage students to do their best work, because especially in a portfolio context, it allows students to select work that they want to put forward as examples of their best work. So it puts a focus and encourages students to indeed think about what they're doing well and have them talk about it in a way that they see it as their best work, but they can do it in that context of what the rubric is asking them to do. In that process, students have to engage in a self-assessment process themselves to determine how well what they have done illustrates what rubrics are looking for in terms of their performance. And it becomes a very rich resource for students, faculty, and other educators and stakeholders to actually have examples and samples of what the students who go through this program, this certificate, this degree can do with the work that they've actually accomplished. The value rubrics, unlike scoring rubrics or grading rubrics, rather for a course or an assignment, are built upon a notion of cumulative learning, of learning over time. None of us learn and get good at what we're learning without practicing it over time. As we grow and develop and experience new things, that learning increases. And that the rubric is designed to be portable across different media, different instances where the learning takes place. And from an assessment accountability standpoint, again, we have all these stakeholders that are in that sort of accountability summative arena. It provides us with a lot of information that can go literally from the classroom level to the programmatic to the institutional level, and be utilized both for general and specific purposes. This all fits within our changing notion of degrees and certificates and education in general. And as you can see from here, I'm not going to go through all of these. It's a shift that you're all, I think, familiar with, from a more traditional model to one educational pattern as that has diversified to what students can actually do, that proficiency, competency, demonstrated over time, so you can see the growth in the development, and a much heavier emphasis on helping students and faculty see the sense and the meaning making. Faculty and educators take on a much bigger role of helping students make sense and make meaning out of what it is they're learning and the applications of it through what we've called high impact practices. Those are things such as internships, community-based learning, group work, teamwork, project-based learning, and those types of things where students actually have to use their learning in a variety of ways. But let me bring this now into the employer arena, because our students are interested in having employment. We as faculty and educators are interested in having employment, i.e. jobs, but we also like the fact that our students have employment, and parents and family members, et cetera, in society, as we're seeing it now in the pandemic, needs people to be able to find ways in which they can be employed and make use of their learning. This is just a brief thing where AAC&U has every couple years for over a decade and a half now done surveys of employers across the country, some international, from local to international firms. In the latest context, we've looked at not only the C-level business executives running those entities, those businesses, but also the talent identifiers, the hiring managers, the ones who are likely to show up on our campus or in a trade career fair or something like that, making initial contact with the students about employment opportunities. And what we're finding is they overwhelmingly believe and have confidence in what colleges and universities are doing. The little box that's sort of over to the right, I pulled out a relatively recent Gallup poll that found that when they surveyed adults nationwide in this country, that a majority of them did not have confidence in what colleges and universities were doing. And that becomes another whole set of issues that we aren't going to talk about. But if we're talking about employers, quite frankly, most employers think that what we're doing is a pretty good job. They would like us to do better, okay? They also think that our students, overwhelmingly, they think our students can use their knowledge and apply it. Again, they would like them to do a better job of that. And that's where high impact practices of practicing learning over and over again in new contexts with higher expectations can indeed be very, very helpful. What are they looking for? What are the priorities that employers talk about? Again, they use slightly different language sometimes, but we're looking here again at the executives as well as the hiring managers. And it's not surprising to those of you who are active in higher education. They're looking for people who can speak and orally communicate, that are critical thinkers. We were a little bit surprised at this. They want students who are ethical. Most employers say they lose money if their employees are not ethically motivated and ethically behaving and making decisions in that way. There's a lot for many of us to learn from that. I won't go through all of this, but again, it's exactly the kinds of things that faculty and educators have been talking about for decades. Employers are looking for those same things. The list does go on. These comport and map very nicely onto the essential learning outcomes that we have value rubrics for. That's not an accident. It's very intentional. The rubrics were developed to try to help us then measure and share and talk across these stakeholder boundaries about how learning is occurring in these particular areas. One of the things we were also surprised, because we are strong advocates for ePortfolios, because it does allow students, faculty, institutions, programs, etc., to capture learning, to see what students can actually do. And this was one of those questions where we asked them about usefulness of college transcripts. They're about evenly split on whether that's a really useful tool or not, but they do see some value in it. We were surprised by the right-hand side of this slide, where we asked them about ePortfolios. One, we were fascinated by the percentage that recognized that there were such things and what they could do, but overwhelmingly, they would love to see student work drawn from a student portfolio to accompany the transcript. And again, institutions are starting to do that formally by linking transcripts to examples of what students can do. They are quick to say they won't look at a whole student portfolio. They're not going to look at the whole portfolio, but they will look at work that has been selected by students in conjunction with faculty that actually tells them this is what a student can do. Part of what we do is we also interview and talk to students at various points over the years. And this was one quote that I love from a student in the University of Wisconsin system. They say, well, why engage in high impact practices? Tell me why this is important, or at least tell me what your end goal is. When you learn this, you're going to become a better adult because blah, blah, blah. Tell me why this matters. And to me, it sort of loops back to something, John, that you were asking before we really started. They want to have some relevance there. They want to know how they can connect to what it is we're talking about in a language that may not be the most familiar language. Employers are the same, different language, so we have to find the ways to translate and to show this beyond words sometimes into the looking at actual work. It's also this sense of how to span boundaries and how to translate this work in two different arenas. Branches from the same tree. In June of 2018, the National Academies did this several years long study of looking at arts and sciences, engineering, and higher ed, saying it is critical to integrate, to blur those boundaries, to cross those boundaries, and help our students see the usefulness and the need for doing that. In essentially the same time frame, Burning Glass Technologies a year ago was they look at all of the jobs that are advertised across the country in all different kinds of occupations. And they came out with this summary of that, the hybrid economy, about new skills, rewriting the DNA of the job market. And a lot of attention was being paid to automation and artificial intelligence, making people obsolete. And they said, we just really need to look at this. This is a continuing movement. It's nothing new. Technology has, for jobs almost immemorial, been continually changing the way we work, how we work, what we do, and the usefulness of that technology as it changes that landscape of jobs. But their point was that if we don't continuously move up the human value curve, we are going to fall behind, not just the technology part of it. And indeed, what they were finding, their biggest theme out of this was lifelong learning is perhaps the biggest thing that was looked for and helped ensure success of our students and our graduates in the workforce, is that we need to help them be equipped for lifelong learning, to have basic skills and abilities that go beyond just content knowledge, but with these learning abilities of critical thinking, of working in groups, working across cultures, orally, visually, written. Because the hybrid jobs are going to be increasing rapidly. They also tend to be higher paying, and they're hard to fill in their analysis of the jobs that are out there and what's happening. More human and less automated our hybrid jobs are. That it makes the human part of what's happening so much more important, because the human has to be able to manage a much more complex technical environment. And these jobs tend not to be entry level. They tend to be the jobs, if you want to advance, you're going to be able to and need to be moving into. And they point specifically to some of those essential learning outcomes, some of those value rubrics that are out there for helping us see the growth and development of the learning, reiterating that what we've been doing is indeed what is needed more at higher levels, not just at a very introductory level, but continually reinforcing and practicing it as students move through their careers in the academy or in formal education. Again, these are just summary things. It helps us maximize our resources. It's blurring boundaries of disciplines. Again, they're so permeable now, and technology is going to continue that. And the internet and the technology is making learning of knowledge and content, which we've spent so much time in our face-to-face interactions with students focused on, because it's no longer linear, it's hypertext. They can get that stuff quicker than we can give it to them. What we now need to do is help them figure out what to do with it, how to make the connections, and how to facilitate that. I'm moving this now into an ePortfolio context. In particular, we have some design principles that we've been working on that we've developed and focused specifically on Gen Ed, because that's the part of our curricula that touches all students in every degree program, if not certificate program. But the curriculum in general, these are principles we need to be more applying, and in particular, portfolios demonstrate them. One is proficiency. We talk a lot about signature work. Basically, that's assignments, things that we really are putting out there for students to be able to start to demonstrate their learning in these integrated contexts. So proficiency of content and things is very important, and the level at which they can integrate and think critically. Student motivation is more and more important in terms of developing the agency of our students and helping them develop the ability to make more decisions themselves, to be more self-directive, all around integrating what they learn in a multitude of contexts, from their families, from their schools, from their jobs, from their social environment, and in dealing with problems that everyday problems are places where we think critically and we make judgments and we work with diverse others. But we can't just introduce it. We have to follow that into more advanced work, into more complex, sophisticated sets of problems and circumstances. And that signature work, those theses, those internships, those shadowing opportunities can no longer be reserved for the students who traditionally have been our most advantaged, accomplished students on old measures, but rather these are the kinds of things that all students can do. They're equipped to do at varying levels, but this is where the most learning occurs, that is the deep learning, the lasting learning. And we again are selling ourselves and our students short if we're not transparent about what we're really looking and seeking for students to do, why it does matter, and being able to demonstrate that and to be assessing it so our students can do a better job of recognizing and assessing their own learning that's taking place. So I've been rushing through things there. I haven't been looking at the chat. I know, Kevin, at one point you said you were going to do that. Are there some questions that I should be pausing here to spend some time on before launching into an application of it in a portfolio context?
There was one question about citations for the info and from Jen, and we did say that we will put the links in the gallery, which we will start tomorrow and wrap up on Friday. More rather than questions, comments. Christina Huppner is astutely pointing out the connections between academic and professional lives. And I know even, I think it was University of Wolverhampton, back when we were doing that international coalition for ePortfolio research. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about the ePortfolio as a transitional node between primary school, secondary school, post-secondary education, and work life. So really making that ability to pivot. But I think you're doing very well, and maybe this is a time to, since we're a small group, encourage the folks to just turn off your mute and ask a question for Terry.
Yeah, just briefly following up on what Christina was talking about, and you mentioned, Kevin, Tracy's in British Columbia. They have ePortfolio project going on in their education system, going from elementary all the way into the university and college, where students can actually start very young in developing a portfolio way of thinking and dealing with and participating in their learning and capturing it and archiving it all the way into their post-secondary educational pathway, whatever that happens to be, and hopefully would then carry it into their professional lives. Again, if we're looking at it from a chronological young kid moving through all the way into a career, it also works for folks who are already in a profession or a career, for being able to bring that together and connect it to both things in a more formal academic setting and other aspects of their lives and stuff. So yeah, we're very much focused here, I think, on a tool that is indeed an integrative glue potentially for so much of what we're talking about. But yeah, who has a question? Because I can go ahead and jump into the example of a utilization of a rubric with a portfolio. Yeah.
Not so much a question, Terry, just a comment for your BC example in case somebody wasn't at the AAEEBL conference in Vancouver in 2018. We do have the recording of Jen Unwin's talk, which was really, really awesome to see how the portfolio work is being done, especially in primary and secondary education. And I put the link into the chat, and it is on the regular AAEEBL Connect channel. So it's really good to have those resources available as well in order to be able to reference them more easily.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina, for doing that. Because it's a fascinating thing of what's possible. And we do have in the US many examples of school systems that do engage students with portfolio, but usually not in a very comprehensive way. Often it's sort of a capstone experience as they may be leaving high school for college. There are some examples of colleges and universities collaborating with school systems in their areas to encourage that kind of preparation for moving to post-secondary. But again, there are too few post-secondary institutions that, as an institution, value the portfolio, often for the school systems to see the usefulness in engaging broadly with it. So, but that's a wonderful example, and thanks for that resource link. Well, okay. Well, I thought it might be useful to utilize or show an example of how one of these rubrics, whether it's a value rubric or it's a different one that someone has developed, can be utilized with a portfolio in some kind of nitty-gritty way of what do you do with it. This is an example of a value rubric. It's the integrative learning value rubric. I haven't shown you the front page of it, which is a brief definition again of what integrative learning meant for the folks that developed the rubric. There's usually a little bit of background on that front page as to how they approached it, some of the research that they examined, and so on and so forth. And they usually, although we tried to keep this to a minimum, will often have a glossary, a set of terms, because many of these rubrics, such as written communication, oral communication, teamwork, already have an existing literature and a set of rubrics that had been developed in the field. And these are meant to be used both by people, the value rubrics are meant to be used by people both in the profession or in the field, as well as people who are not of the field. And so some of that jargon of the field is there. The developers felt that it needed to be there, but a glossary helps explain what it is so that you can have a better understanding and utilization of it. But this is the rubric page itself that many of you will be familiar with. And I'll be paying attention in particular to the left-hand column, which are some of the criteria, aspects. When we talk to folks about when you're looking for integrative learning, when you want to know if your students can integrate their learning, what do you look for in the work that the student is presenting? And they've had long lists of things, but these were the ones that seemed to be the most common and salient for most of the folks who were in this arena and using this kind of, looking for this kind of learning. And so you'll see that there are, in this instance, 5 of them. Again, the developers and those who were using these told us, out of those long lists, we can't deal with a dozen or 13 different things. We need to reduce it to like 5 or 6. That's the most we can handle. in this broader effort to look at student work. And so these were the ones that's popped to the top. And so there's connections to experience, in particular, the experience of the students and the knowledge that the student has. Connections to the discipline, so that it does keep it connected to that formal content disciplinary area. Transfer. Integration is partly transferring information and things from place to place, instance to instance. Integrated communication. Again, multiple ways to both talk about it as well as to gather information and make sense out of it from different communication places and styles. And then finally, reflection and self-assessment. That integrative learning was so, the self-reflection and self-assessment was so important around the integrative learning because it helped the individual become more proficient in a broader array of instances. The other part that I'll be making some reference to is what goes across, where it says capstone to milestone benchmarks, which really is that cumulative reflection of what the learning looks like as folks who are less familiar is the word I'm looking for, with aspects of critical thinking or integrative, as they get more sophisticated and more complex in what they're able to do, is reflected in that. 4 is the top number here, the 1 being students who are more new coming into looking at this in a formal way. These are just some basic guidelines that have been developed for utilizing the rubrics with portfolios. Again, we typically don't look at a whole portfolio. We look at examples of work in that portfolio at different places and points. And so you start out by looking at the rubric and the rows that are there, so you have a good sense of what it is you're looking for, because you're using the rubric to help you make some judgments about this. Then you read the portfolio evidence pieces, or piece at a time often, asking, what does this do? Which one of these levels or cells, descriptive cells, would it fit most closely? Each piece is relevant to the rubric in the portfolio, is already determined. Okay, so this is part of the benchmarking, part of the ability to place my judgment in a more larger context. And so trying to hold some things constant. Typically this does revolve around either a student making his or her selection of this is a good example of this, or by having what I referenced before is like a signature work of some sort. Every student is doing it. And so the evaluator, the faculty member, can have a more level playing field in terms of the expectation for the learning, and then start to see how students have responded and demonstrated. We do indeed encourage folks to look at the work and to make notes about it, and to look at the highest level and see if that's happening. If not, then move to a slightly less higher, a little less higher expectation, and give it the benefit of the doubt based upon what you're seeing in the student work. And that's the final one here. Using rubrics is not a science, it's an art as well as a science. There is science to it, but using rubrics and making these judgments are indeed an art form. And so if you have 3 relevant pieces in the portfolio, 2 scored a 3, 1 a 2, we would say if you need to give an average for that dimension, for that work, give it the 3. Again, that just comes out of learning theory, where when students see what they can do, it helps you build off of that to higher levels. And so by looking for what the students can do rather than what they can't do, and stressing that, provides a firmer base and really a greater connection for moving the work and the student forward into the future. even if it's into the next class. So the idea is that you would indeed look at multiple examples. Here I'm going to, again, start us with the integrative learning rubric, and I'm going to start with the row that is on reflection and self-assessment. Again, this is very hard to read in your context. It's all going to be in the gallery and the resources, so that you'll be able to do this at your leisure. But here's the first piece from the first student portfolio that I want to show you. And it's a standards kind of portfolio organization. There's a welcome, goals, etc. And here in the showcase, the work showcase that's going to be evaluated, you can see the categories that have been created. The creative writing, some of its editing, some of its leaderships, strategy, and planning down that left-hand column. This one is inspiring involvement in community projects, and you'll see that under leadership as one of the examples that the student is presenting for integrative learning in that context. And so there's narrative, there are some pictures there. You can click on that and you get a mission, tasks that were completed and what they did, a little bit about what process they moved through, things that they tried out, etc. So this is the evidence, the work that they're showing related to this one example that's part of their overall portfolio around integrative learning. And so in looking at it, using the rubric, you would then apply the rubric to that material. This is an instance where the evaluator said it meets that 3 category. There's a description of what was looked for. And what the person did is look at the actual piece of student work and then started to circle some of the pieces that they looked at that told them this is what 3 is looking for. That level of performance is reflected. This is language. These are pieces of what the student presented that convince me and point me to what's described in that performance category that we call 3 for this piece of work, okay? So it's really trying to keep it connected and grounded, not in what I think, but in what the student is saying and doing. This is the second piece from that same portfolio. And here it's writing a children's book. And that is in that first category of creative writing. So a different part of the way in which the student is showing integrative learning. And again, it's got some graphics, it's got some tasks that are laid out, what they've done, there's some reflection on this. And again, this is a row that's looking for self-assessment and reflection. And so in this instance, again, the evaluator thought it was at that 3 level. And again, examples from different parts of the work for this example, where again, they're sort of circling things that indicated to them that the student was showing reflection and self-assessment in this piece of work. Okay, so it's, again, trying to keep it connected to what's there in the student work in relation to what the rubric is actually asking. Let's take a different row. That was self-assessment and reflection. Student looking at her or his learning and have their view of their own learning. This is the connection to experience that connects the experience in the academic knowledge, relevant experience in academic knowledge. We're using it now in a different portfolio. If you actually get to a place and a point where you can read all of the material that's in here, it does give you a clue of the institution it came from. We actually have, this is important, particularly in terms of what we talked about last week in our annual meeting. we have permission from these students to show you their portfolios, to share it with you in this context. But I've also tried to protect the identity of the student, but not necessarily the program and or the institution that it was occurring at, because that got to be really cumbersome, right, for this purpose. But we do have permission, ethical, digital, transparency. You need students' permission to use their work and to share it with others, okay? But this is one that was from an institution where students really got to do a lot of preparation of their own major, their own emphasis as they move toward graduation. This student was in religion and the visual arts. And so again, it's got that basic framework. This graphic visual looks a little weird because it actually was moving. In real time, it would have been moving as it moved through the quote that was there and some of the visual pictures and things behind it. But you're welcomed into this portfolio. This student, first piece that was submitted in this portfolio, again, looking at the connection between discipline and student experience, this student was, again, integrating the learning. And so you get, she has a lot of graphical things, again, at the left-hand frame, that would be moving in the actual portfolio. Several pictures here in terms of a description of what was going on. You'll see on this, to the right-hand side, this young woman it's her portfolio. She hasn't put into it a short video. She was in religion and the visual arts because she wanted to bring these things together because they had so much meaning to her. She's a very religious person and very involved in her church. So again, looping back to how do you get students engaged and involved in their learning? This is one of the ways. She built it off of what was happening in her own life before she even came to the institution, and now is engaged in integrating into the formal academic curriculum and learning that was going on. But she has a video of herself. I think in this case, it was working with a Sunday school class or something to that effect. But they were also engaged in the community. And part of what they did is they went into the community and they asked people to join with them at this fair and to create a quilt of things. And so they had things color coded, and people would bring their strips and they would get to actually, they had a loom set up, and the community members would take their strip of cloth and put it into essentially really weave it into the product. It was then displayed at the fair as it was being built, and became, I think they auctioned it for a charity at one point. But again, we're back to the rubric here, and the evaluator found this to be at 4 level, a very, very accomplished level. And again, going back to the writing in the narrative of the student, the explanation of what was going on in related to the community banner that they had put together, and circling again the places where there were some connections between the disciplinary content and the things that she brought from her own experience and past. This is the second piece that the same student did in her portfolio. Again, it's visual arts. And here she used photographs to tell the story. And so it's not just a text story, but you can actually see it displayed in the labels and the sequencing of the pictures that are there. And again, I don't have the slide in here. Again, the evaluator thought this was at a 4 level. And again, they circled some of the text, but they also circled pictures when they were looking at this to make the connection, because the visual as well as the text were reinforcing and being integrated as well. This is now moving to a different portfolio, a student at Virginia Tech, talking about her brother and stuff. She's a first-year student, and getting to the end of her first year. But this I wanted to do to give you sort of a rapid walkthrough of chunks of that portfolio of a student ending their first year and looking at the entire overview of the integrative learning rubric, so that with connections to experience, the student's experience, they gave the student a 2. And again, there are examples of circling what the student was doing in terms of talking about her own experiences connected to this, the examples that were given here, and trying to make that very clear. But then there also, we're looking at the connection to experience and the discipline. Again, their judgment overall was that it was at a 2, but again, pointing to where they looked to see those connections between student experience and the disciplinary content. The third and fourth areas are the transfer and the integrative communication. This was a Facebook page that was she put together around a charity event that she had organized. There were flyers that were in there as well. But again, it allowed for the transfer of things into different contexts and media to be there, as well as the ability to communicate it in different ways at the same time in each of those media. So they, on both of those scores, dimensions, criteria, they gave it a 3. And then the last one was the reflection and self-assessment. And there were multiple things that the student included. She had done a shadowing work with an architect, and this is the architect's evaluation of her as in that shadowing process. What you'll see is that there are questions posed, and the response is yes, 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 excellent. That's not real helpful to me as a faculty member or to me as a student, really. And so it does 2 things here. One, it says to the faculty, what are the questions we ask and what are the responses that we're looking for? We need to help those outside doing evaluations that we want to use. And what are those response options? Because this is not giving us a whole lot of useful information. This is her personal reflection on what her goals were. And she's very highly motivated by traditional things like a grade point average and the grades in her classes, one of those honor students we talked about. But she also had things about her body and her health that she was after. And then she sort of does her own reflection on that. And in this instance, they gave her a 2 on that as well. Now you could say, oh, well, that's not all that good. 2s, primarily 2s, she might get a 2 for this portfolio at the end of that freshman year related to integrative learning, given those guidelines that I showed. No, this is actually quite good. This is a student who's finishing her first year of college. And she's actually doing some rather good work on dimensions of the integrative learning. She's got the technology, the integrated communication, so the score itself is important. It places us, it anchors us, but it's really looking at what is driving it. And part of that is where's the student, where are they in this part of what they're doing, and how am I as a professor or an evaluator or someone outside of the academy doing a shadowing example, viewing this and helping us keep it in a perspective, in a context. This is just a graphic that I kind of like. It's really busy and weird, but at the bottom, it takes one of those rows from the rubric. In this case, it's the capstone for problem solving. And it lays it out here in terms of what the expectations of performance are for a student completing a baccalaureate degree on each one of those dimensions. But then it sort of lays it on the curriculum, across the curriculum of the program, on how you would start with a first year and then move them through a mastery attainment that might not occur and likely wouldn't occur on all of these dimensions for every rubric until they were getting their baccalaureate degree. And so it's scaffolding high impact practices, which are in those white boxes, with the rubric, laying those expectations out for this is where we want to be, so a student can see it in a way to encompass the entire arc or path that may be laid out that they're laying out. So that's it. I've talked way too much. There's still a few minutes left here. And again, these will all be available in the gallery for you to look at in more detail. And so I'll turn it over to Kevin or Tracy or whoever wants to jump in.
I'd love to have the participants. Yeah, Jen, go ahead, ask a question.
Hi, thanks. So my question is, and I'm sorry if I missed that. I'm kind of trying to take notes and listen at the same time. We all know how.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm not very good at that either. That's why I don't even look at the chat room when I'm doing it.
Yeah, no, I know. How much can you focus on at once, right? So my question is, and I'm sorry if I missed it. It's just so this assessment is done at the end of the first year, is what you said.
At that school in that, yes, that's when they did it. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if it's done in the context of a particular class, or is it done like in the context of a major? Or, I mean, one of the reason I'm asking is, you know, I'm thinking about our ePortfolio program where I work is in the beginning stages. And so we've been working through some things for a few years now. And we're at the place where I'm trying to help a department to really fully integrate ePortfolio in a meaningful way. And I'm trying to find that balance of how often to provide the feedback, where to provide the feedback. So again, when you were looking at that value rubric and you're showing, you know, this is a first year student that gets the 2s, I agree, like that's good, you know, like that's good. But by the time that person is finished, you hope they're more in the 3 and the 4s, right? You know,
right.
And how do we build them into it? So I'm just wondering if there are models that you would recommend that would kind of help a department to recognize what are the best steps to take and when to take them, when to make the you know, the kind of the official, you know, feedback, or you know, how to do that.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And the other part of that I think is also good is that there's not one answer to it. So there are places like Clemson University used to do it at the time that students were approaching graduation. And that was the only formal time that it happened. There was opportunities for informal feedback that students could avail themselves of as they were putting it together. In most of these examples, the one where the religion student, that was something that occurred sort of in their capstone, but the courses that were the core courses of that program, there were always the opportunities, and a part of what they did in every course was do work that ended up in the portfolio. But at the end of it, they would pull out the pieces that they thought were best and use those. That's one of the key things to it is, and it's hard when you're starting, is students know whether this counts. And if it doesn't count to the faculty or to the program, they're not going to take it as seriously. And so where signature work occurs, a lot of places, that's probably the most common, I think I've found, is that there's some form of a signature work that will be then placed in courses or at points in the career. So that a program, and that helps the programmatic part of it, so that it will be reoccurring as students, and so they know it's happening. The other thing, though, is that more and more we're finding that faculty are taking the rubric and doing a translation of it into more of a grading rubric. And so they're using it to actually grade the work as it's occurring in a course. And that becomes part of the grade for the course. Not the only one. They may have tests and other things that they're doing too, but it becomes built into it. But it's aligned with the general point of moving the student forward. And so, again, I should have had this already out there. Bonnie Orcutt, who's at Worcester State in Massachusetts, has done a wonderful YouTube on taking one of the value rubrics on quantitative literacy and showing how she used it, took it and turned it into a grading rubric that she could use with assignments in a class and come up with a grade for the course. And so students are already habituated to the pieces and the aspects of what quantitative literacy had as they move through the rest of the curriculum. And she started in her intro econ course. Portland State does it like at the end of a quarter. And so there's a formal process there where every student sort of identifies and reflects at that point, and that becomes part of the evaluation at the end of the quarter as they're moving through their general education program there. So there are lots of models out there, and there's no one that's right. I think you need to look at both opportunities of faculty in your programs and stuff who are interested in doing this. And so there may be some different models at a programmatic level. At the institutional level, if you've got touch points where most or all students are going to be doing something, or you create them and they're all doing some type of signature assignment, it's not the same cookie cutter thing, but it's the same goal and process that's there. You could create a model that would work for you, where you've got advocates to get it going, and others will start to see the usefulness of it, I think. Sorry, a long answer. And I probably pushed us over time.
Thank you for your answer.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. Other questions? If you can stay for one more minute. I don't know. It's up to Kevin and Tracy.
Well, if people are available to hang out, that's great. I do have to run, and
Yep.
I see Tracy's still here, so she can always close the session. I do want to let people know that in addition to the fantastic stylus discount that we shared at the beginning of the session, we also have next week on Wednesday a stylus Meet the Author discussion, where we'll be engaging with different folks who are writing about and thinking about and directing our attention to different ePortfolio issues and that correspond with the themes of the week. So hopefully you'll join us again next Wednesday. But I am going to hop off. Please stay, and maybe we can, while we get those last questions out, also thank Terry for his time, his wisdom, his expertise. And it was, I know I learned new things that I hadn't heard before about the value rubrics. And so, and it's always nice to reframe how we look at giving scores to students as a way to position themselves on their path as opposed to a score or something else. Tracy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'm glad I was able to get back on in this little sleepy town that I'm in. But, you know, definitely want to let you all know that if you have follow-up questions or, you know, we can be of assistance. We're certainly happy to help. We have a great Slack channel that Helen Chen has set up for us. And so you can post general questions there. Feel free to contact us directly. Whatever you need, we're here to help. And we really look forward to continuing to stay in contact with you. And of course, thanks so much to Terry for this fantastic conversation and session.
Well, thank all of you, and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.